I was asked by a customer to make a 3-weight fly rod with the theme of Brook Trout spots. So I found a coloring page image and I flipped it and reversed it and put it into paint and wrapped it around the grip that was being glued at that point in time. And obviously I needed to fill in some spots, so I started kind of tweaking some of those little wormy designs that are on their back. This is what it looked like roughly before I sanded the grip down. This shape of this grip is going to be a cigar shape because it's a 3-weight. And after I got done sanding it, I planned to burn it and then try to go back and figure out how to add the color. So I wanted to fill in all the voids in the cork with some cork dust and Titebond 3 so I could make a cork filler. Put it on there. I let it dry overnight and came back and sanded it. This is the pattern that I had, and now I needed to transfer it. I was having a booger of a time trying to figure out how to transfer it. I ended up grabbing a alcohol ink pen, and knowing it was going to bleed through, I traced everything, and it did actually leave the design on there. So I was able to take my wood burner and basically make the outline. So I used the burning to create the outline so that I could go back and paint it. And I was burning through the ink that was on there, so this is what it looked like whenever the ink was still on there with the burn. And I was actually pretty happy with how this was looking so far. Keep in mind, first time trying this, I needed to get rid of the ink so I could see what it looked like raw, and so I used isopropyl to remove it, and I had to do that about 2 times to get all of the ink off of there, plus the transfer that happened. And this is what I ended up with. So now at this point I need to figure out how I'm going to add color to it. Today was test day, trying to figure out what medium would take best to the cork, so I doodled some circles and then wood burned them on there just to have an outline. And first thing up is the alcohol inks. So that one initially went on really smooth. It went on, covered it really nicely. The color stayed vibrant. I did a rub test on it, and the majority of the colors were fine. The red was the last one I colored, and it rubbed off, so maybe if I let it dry longer, it'll be fine. Next up is the acrylic markers, and those did really well as well. And I did a smudge test basically immediately afterwards, and it immediately smudged, so maybe if I let this dry longer it might work. I don't know. Last is the watercolor pencils, and as I was trying to color it on there, I was already going, this isn't looking so good. It was very pale, but I decided let's try to add some water to it, and I feel like it made it look worse. So here's the 3 side by side. Watercolor pencils I'm just going to go ahead and kick out because that's just not looking good to me. The alcohol inks did really nicely. I like how vibrant the colors are. I like how smooth it went on and how it was basically soaked in. And the acrylic markers, I'm going to test that again and let it sit and dry before I touch it. But next thing up is going to be which is going to seal them best. The first thing I wanted to test was U40 cork sealer because it's supposed to waterproof everything. So I just slid these onto the mandrel I actually used to glue up the cork grips. And I'm keeping all 3 of them in play just to see what happens to them. And following the directions, because I haven't used this before, I usually use cork enhancer. It says just to apply a thin coat to it, and that's it. Let it dry. It's usually dry in about 30 minutes. It's ready to use in 24 hours. So for each one, I put a thin coat on there. I used a paintbrush so that I could control the amount that was going on there. And honestly, pretty easy application. Couldn't complain about it. It's really watery as far as the texture is concerned. And it dries really, really quick. I just went back and made sure that I had a really thin coat on all 3 of them, kind of going back over it and evening out whatever I had, and let it dry from there. And the mandrel was slipping a little bit because it is super skinny. First appearances, the alcohol ink definitely did bleed way more than I anticipated because it ran all the way around. The acrylic paint, that one actually held up pretty well. I didn't notice any actual bleeding or anything from the original smudge. And I kept the watercolor pencils in there because why not? It just looked terrible as it is. So after they had dried, I could definitely tell there was more smearing on the alcohol ink, and the acrylic still looked like it was, but there was a little bit of darkening to it. Pretty happy with the results, honestly. So at this point, I'm kind of thinking that the acrylic's going to work. It's test day to see what colors is going to stay on the cork and what medium's going to work. So I actually forgot that I had this cork enhancer by Cork for Us. And talking with a bunch of people, I just could not figure out like what was going to be the best option to keep the cork feel and not completely cover it. I'm really trying not to use a poly on it. After applying the cork enhancer and wiping off the extra, the alcohol ink still seems to be smudging a little bit, but the acrylic, I did let it dry for 30 minutes before I did this, seems to hold its shape, so we'll see. I want to test these in saltwater solution, like a saltwater mixture, like the ocean water. And I figure if it will withstand the salt water, 2 of these are for saltwater, the other grip is for freshwater, but the freshwater is going to be the one that's colored the most, so if it holds up in salt, it should be good, right? So you mix 35 grams of salt to a liter of water, and because cork won't stay down and it floats, I grabbed a bowl for the 2 I added today for the cork enhancer, and then the other ones that I did with the U40 for the sealer are 2 stacked on top of each other, and so I needed a plate to hold them down, but I don't have enough water covering them completely, so I added another mixture to it and checked to make sure they were completely submerged. And then I'm going to give them 3 days to sit in this. I'm not going to touch them. I'm just going to let them sit on my counter, and on Saturday we will see who the winner is. A full 72 hours later, which was Saturday when I was doing this, I removed everything from the water. So the cork enhancer were the first 2 that I pulled out, and the acrylic paint seems to look really nice even though it's saturated. I didn't see any smudging or smearing, so that was actually a good sign. But the alcohol ink, I had to giggle at this because it just completely faded away. It was super vibrant and it's just gone. And then the next up was seeing what happened with the U40 ones. And I did put that watercolor pencil one in there. It faded. It just didn't do so hot. The acrylic seemed to hold very well, so that was actually a good sign. And the alcohol ink, it had a lot of smearing. You can see where the red really is running in this one. So I let these dry for about 3 hours before I went to test them. Alcohol ink. So that red smear continued to get more and more smeared, and other colors started to kind of fade away. Good news is the greens and the blues kind of held up pretty well, but the red that is going to be part of the Brook Trout is not good. And this is the acrylic paint pen that was also in play. So this one seems to have done really well. And we had the other 2 that... This was just funny. This was with the cork enhancer, so the worst one. That actually is the alcohol ink. So the alcohol inks just faded away. Like, it just barely even, not even there. And the acrylic did not do anything. It stayed exactly the same. So since these 2, out of all these other tests, were better, my final decision on this is they've been sitting in water for 3 days. I let them dry out for about 2 hours now, almost a little over 3. And I want to take it and I want to rub and see if there's any transfer at this point. Now the biggest thing that I noticed with the U40 is there's a slightly different texture to the cork, but you can still like you can hear it. Okay, so it's kind of what I would consider a grippy kind of texture. It's not tacky. It's not like causing my hand any kind of discomfort or anything like that. And I'm trying to really rub. And honestly, I don't see any. There's no transfer. It's not pulling the colors off. So that's good. But you can hear there's a slight texture difference. And just for reference, the raw cork, nothing on it. It has a smoother sound, kind of velvet feel, obviously, because it's cork. Like I said, not a big difference. You can kind of tell there's a little bit of something on there, but it's not bad. And the cork enhancer, which to me, out of the 2, this one kept the colors the brightest. It's the softest out of the 2. And I'm really trying to get it off. No transfer. Out of the 2, I think I'm going to go with the cork enhancer. The cork itself stayed brighter. Colors seem to stay brighter. This one doesn't feel, like I said, between the 2, this one's got a little bit of an extra kind of tack to it. But the colors kind of got a little bit more muted than I would have liked. And this one stayed pretty bright. So what I'll do is I'll go with this one, and for everybody that's getting these colors on theirs, I will actually probably send them a bottle to go with it. That way they can touch it up every 3 to 6 months, depending on when it needs it, and we can go forward with getting the grips colored. So I bought 3 or 4 different sets of acrylic markers, and I am currently trying to test which yellow at the moment is going to match up best to the little wormy kind of squigglies that happen on the back of the brook trout, and really just playing color by number at this point. I did the same with all the blues, all the greens, all the reds, and the oranges, and wanted to make sure I was getting the most accurate color for the situation. This is the very first time that I have tried to color cork, and especially something as like realistic as I was trying to aim for. So there was a lot of like adding light colors and dark colors and kind of creating kind of shades within things. There's a whole lot of trying to make sure I'm getting texture added as well, and so I emulated like dotting techniques to kind of create the scale-like look to it, and also to help kind of blend those lighter and darker colors together. And that's really kind of what I focused on the entire time. And I tried my best with a reference photo to kind of get these things to really match up. And like I said, I just gotta throw it out there. It's the first time I'm doing it. I don't know what I'm doing. So with the greens, I tried to get 3 greens that were similar in shades but would kind of like fade out. And what I did was I just kind of created lines. So I would draw a line just haphazardly, just kind of squiggly up and down, taking up a certain amount of the area, and I kept the back of the grip darker. So I put the darkest color of the green on the back because that's where they see the most sun. That's typically where they're the darkest. And I would just kind of blend both of those colors together using both the lighter and the darker in those dotting textures. And that's just the entire concept behind the grip, was just making sure that I was lining and just kind of making sure that it was kind of realistic, if you will. Now, the other thing I want to point out is that when you do put these paints on cork, they do darken a little bit more than what you would like be testing on like paper. So as you put it on there, it's going to darken up a little bit, and really be careful not to touch it, because even with the acrylic markers, it's just like acrylic paint, but it's a little bit thinner so that it can run through the marker tip. Try not to touch that area for at least a good 5-10 minutes, depending on how warm your area is that you're working in. Depends on how long it's going to dry. And you can see in this one where the green that I'm putting on is really bright, but at the beginning of that grip, it's actually darkened a little bit. So that's kind of how it darkens. But once again, it's just it's like coloring a page. You just kind of fill it in. And then when I started to transition to the yellows, that's when I started to kind of get like, this is going to be a little awkward. But that's when I really like hammered in that kind of dotting method. Now, hindsight for me, I wish I had made this a little bit more true to where like the belly had a larger white area. What I did was I marked out kind of like where the greens were going, and then I said, oh crap, I need to go back and I need to actually mark where the white line on their belly is going to be with the reds and stuff. And I knew I needed to have like that red color in there predominantly so that it would scream brook trout, even though the spots do it. So my belly line ended up being really kind of tiny. I should have made the pattern just a little bit smaller, but hindsight's 20/20, and that's one of those things where with these videos where I'm teaching you what I'm doing as I'm doing it, because it's the first time, I can go, hey, make it a little bit more proportionate, it'll look a little bit more realistic. But the end product, even though the little belly stripe is super thin, I love it. I think I ended up looking really good, and with all that dotting that I did between all the lighter and the darker colors, really made it look like it had scales. So the only thing that I did after this was I let it dry for about 24 hours and covered it over with the cork enhancer, and it's ready to go.